Good morning. I'm starting the day with my nose a bit out of joint, saying, Obama didn't ask me for a meeting this morning. What am I, small potatoes? As my biography indicates, I have a bit of a checkered past. I'm in the classroom now and started my professional life in the classroom, teaching American literature of all things. And in between, spent a lot of time as a librarian and a publisher. So I speak from several perspectives. But one of my favorite pedagogical tools since I first walked into the classroom, 30 years ago, teaching composition and rhetoric, was define your terms, and particularly whenever anything got spiky, I would say, so what do you mean by? And of course, Google, as it is in so many areas of our life, is a great assistant with this in the classroom. This is my favorite little Google tool, define. Do you all use define? Define, your term. And so, as we do when we come to give talks like this, we got our prompt, our title, what we think the session is about. And I found myself, and I think you'll hear this from Micah later too, kind of going, really? Is it? Are they? And so I started asking people around me, what's a mandate? What's a mandate? And they'd say, well, an order? It's when somebody orders you to do something? And then other people would say, no, it's that thing we give to politicians at election time. Like when somebody is elected by an overwhelming majority, somebody on the news always says, so-and-so has been given a mandate to name the plank of the party platform. So I said, let's define our terms. So I won't trot you through the many definitions of mandate on the web. You can do define mandate and find them. But I went to my favorite dictionary of all time, the Oxford English Dictionary, said, okay, what does it have to say about what a mandate is? And found, in fact, that there are two uses that come out at the top. The first, a noun, a contract by which one person authorizes another to act without payment on his or her behalf, either generally or in a particular capacity. And I think this is closer to the sense we use it at election time. And then the second is a verb, to command. And this was quite interesting to me. Obsolete, rare. Because I believe that this is the way in which it has come to be understood in the discussion around open access. Somebody is telling the authors what they have to do. And so I wanted to investigate whether that was in fact true. So I spent a lot of time refamiliarizing myself with what we have come to call the mandates around open access, and decided that what was called for was a little bit of a taxonomy of so-called mandates, and found that there are some from the top down, which we'll look at this more, but seem a little bit more to have the sense of something that is ordered. Somebody has decided this. And there are some that come from the bottom up, where a group of interested persons say, hey, you can do this for us, in the sense of the contract, or perhaps a permission. And there's some that I don't quite know how to classify, and I will speak about one of those that's very close to my home at some length at the end. Oops. So some of them come from pretty high up. And I doubt that anybody here needs to be familiarized with the White House Office of Science and Technology policy declaration, mandate, about open access to federally funded research within 1 year of publication. So I would ask you the question, and you can answer me later if you want, is this in fact a mandate? Or is it, the term I became more comfortable with is a requirement. If you want to accept federal funding, there are certain requirements which you have to meet. And in that sense, it strikes me as less of a mandate than an economic transaction. There's an exchange of value. In fact, not entirely unlike the economic transaction that happens in traditional publishing. You want the value that the publisher confers, whether that's the value of the imprimatur or the value of the editing and the production work. You make an exchange of value. You assign the exclusive right to distribute. You often sign over your copyright. So I would say that there are publishing requirements. I'm hesitant to call them mandates. Here's another approach from high up, from my former institution. Well, the boss tells you, is it a mandate? So at the University of Michigan, it has long been the expectation that the work of all employees, the copyright and the work of all employees, is in the hands of the institution. It's all work for hire. And I can't say how long this dates back, but I know that when I signed my first work agreement there 23 years ago, and this continued for a very long time, it was just, there was a piece of paper in the huge pack of paper that you were handed when you get a new job, and you just signed, I understand this. But always, by practice, the university left the copyrights of the faculty in the hands of the copyright to manage. So legally, it was with the university. Always in practice, it was managed by the individual faculty member who authored the work. And so about 5 or 6 years ago, I think some of the faculty and some of the legal counsel on campus got a little antsy about the lack of clarity in this policy. And so they drafted a revision to the standard practice guide to make this clear. And just to call out a couple of things here. So the default under U.S. copyright law, the university holds the copyright as works for hire on copyrighted works authored by its employees who are acting within the scope of their employment. So pretty much everybody. But what they wanted to make clear, and is here in B, in light of the default, the university hereby transfers any copyrighted holds in scholarly works to the faculty who authored those works. So the faculty create it, it goes to the university, it gets handed right back to the faculty. But this is what I think is interesting in light of our thinking about open access. Note that there are conditions. When the university transfers copyright in scholarly works to faculty under this policy, it reserves the exclusive right to use scholarly works for educational or administrative purposes, and to preserve, archive, and host scholarly works in its institutional repositories, such as Deep Blue, which is the repository I managed. So built into the copyright policy of the university, rather than going the route of the open access mandate, is the declaration that the university reserves that bit of the copyright and can make those works accessible in the institutional repository. Although it does say where the faculty control the timing and scope of access to their copyrighted works. So the institution can put it in the repository, but it's up to the individual faculty member to decide when and how much it should be open. As I understand it, and I have not been at the university for a couple of years now, this has not been significantly engaged. It remains part of the standard practice guide, but the university hasn't gone in and scooped up all the faculty members' publications and put them into the repository in order to be in keeping with the standard practice guide. What would be interesting to me is if the university pushed back on author contracts when the authors have signed the exclusive right to distribute to someone else, if they said, you know, the author never had that right to sign away. Because we reserve the right to put things in our open access repository. Hasn't happened, might happen someday. An author may ask the university to do that if they have mistakenly signed something they didn't intend to. But it will be interesting to me to see if that comes out. But again, nothing is mandated in the sense of being ordered, but it's made possible from the top up, from the top down. And then I think would have gotten a lot of attention, and a couple of them are very close to home here, when the creators of works have organized themselves to mandate, perhaps, and let's ask that question again, open access to their works. So you've probably seen these before in some way, but here's MIT's, Harvard's, and the University of California's open access statements, and they read much the same. The faculty member grants to the institution the non-exclusive permission to make available his or her scholarly articles and to exercise the copyright in those articles for the purposes of open dissemination. They all pretty much start out the same. So nothing is being ordered here. The faculty are saying this is possible. The university is authorized and granted the permission to do this. And it creates an expectation in many cases that the creators of the work will cooperate with the university in making these works available. We were talking briefly amongst ourselves in the panel before you all came in about, and is this being required anywhere? Are there any teeth behind these policies? Is anybody checking? I spent last night having dinner with 2 Harvard faculty members, very old friends, and they said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Oh yeah, that thing we're supposed to do." Yeah, sometimes I get my grad student to help me put things in the repository, but there was no sense of threat or requirement, and that's only 2 people. Other people may feel different, but it's not something that is monitored. So if it is a mandate, I think it is in that what the OED says is the more common usage, the noun, the contract. You may act on my behalf, institution, and not in the sense of the order or command. And for the last little bit of my talk, I would like to concentrate on something that I walked into. It was a law that was enacted, I think, 8 days after I moved to Illinois this summer. Public Act 00980295. Whose short title is the Open Access to Research Articles Act. It was in development known as the BIS Bill, after the senator who introduced it, and then the BIS Law, but now it's being more commonly called the Open Access to Research Articles Act. The General Assembly finds and declares the following: to maximize the social and economic benefits of research to the published research articles produced by faculty at public universities should be made as widely available as possible. Wide availability referring both to the depth of availability of a given research article, including immediate availability where practicable, long-term preservation and free public access, and broad accessibility for reuse and further research. And the breadth of research articles made available, and then it goes on at something. It's a long law. It's about 14 pages, I think, the entire thing. May not surprise you to learn that Senator Daniel Biss, who introduced and championed the legislation, was a faculty member at the University of Illinois, Chicago, a mathematician, so that when you said the mathematics are resistant, I thought, oh, maybe he was a renegade, I don't know. But that it came out of his experience with that. But he did get it passed through the Illinois state legislature. And the thinking is that I believe that the state funds, supports, pays for all of this. It should belong at least to the people of the state, and we want to maximize its impact, so it should go beyond that as well. So, okay, it's a law. How's that going to work? Well, the very first dictum under the law is talk about that. So in Section 15, by January 1st, 2014, so within a few months of the law passing, each public university shall establish an open access to research task force. So that's its first order, is talk about it. Try to figure it out. And they wanted to give the task force some structure as well. And so they laid out in the law what the task force should be doing. And I won't read this all, but consider how it might work. Look at how it's working elsewhere. Look at what the federal government is asking. Talk about those things. And this here, just the last line here, consider academic, legal, ethical, and fiscal ramifications of and questions regarding an open access policy. Okay, think about those things. But then where it gets really interesting is they lay out all the areas that the task force should look at. And I've shortened them up here. I'll let you read the list. But you see academic freedom, copyright policy, disciplinary differences. And this is where I'd actually encourage you to read the law as good reading. Because I go like, a bunch of senators sitting around coming up with this list. They sound like librarians. And they wanted to make sure that all of these things were addressed. And I'll talk a little bit more about how the task force has been working. But indeed, they've been looking at each of these in depth. The report's in draft now, and I think it's 23 pages in draft. And that's before it's received the full array of comments. And each of these things gets a multi-paragraph treatment. So in order to comply with the law, starting in November, the University of Illinois, and that was taken as a group, all the campuses, Board of Trustees appointed a task force. The membership includes faculty from all three campuses, university administration, librarians from 2 of the campuses. The librarians liked this, that a state law actually said you must include librarians. You also must include publishers. And so there are people from the commercial publishing sector on the task force, as well as the director of the University of Illinois Press. The commercial publishers are non-voting members on the task force, but they have been full participants. And there is legal counsel that is advisory, although not a voting member as well. And when the report is issued, which should happen within a month or 2 after all the comments come in, there's a full list of the task force members there. So they got together and took the charge of the law and started working through all of the issues. And as I said, they have gotten to the point of draft, and I know they hope to have the report concluded by summer at the latest. So finish by talking about, because if this is a mandate in the sense of an order, the mandate right now is think about it. And that's been a really interesting effect of the law, that it has really opened up the conversation about open access throughout the University of Illinois system. And things that many people had tried to make happen before, like, oh, we should get some faculty and some administration and some librarians together and talk about this stuff, like we should try to figure it out. Now somebody's putting the thumb down and saying, you guys got to talk about this stuff. You got to be in compliance with the law. And then I'm trying to remember, I think there are 14 members on the task force, if I'm remembering correctly. They talk to their friends, they talk to their spouses. Suddenly, lots of people are talking about open access and what does it mean. The focus of the conversation, although they have dutifully trotted through all the things that the law requires, has almost been entirely on academic freedom from the beginning. Are they trying to tell us where to publish? Well, I don't like that. You don't tell the faculty where to publish. No, we're not telling you where to publish. We're just telling you how to manage your copyright agreements. So there's been a lot of discussion about academic freedom. And very quickly, the task force came to the conclusion that the most important thing they could do as part of their work was to protect the faculty's academic freedom, that was the structure which underpins all research at the University of Illinois, and that it needs to be supported and nurtured. And so one thing that the task force did quickly was to say, we can't say if this is going to work, how it's going to work. That's up to the faculty. So they turned to the faculty senates of the University of Illinois campuses and said, can you guys put together a plan about how this might work? And then we will try to structure our report so as to support your plan, because we believe, and I think they say in the draft of the report that I've seen, that the choice of publication venue is a matter of professional and technical expertise, and that lies with the creator of the work. They understand the context in which they work and in which they publish, and so they should be making those decisions. So the Senate committee also feeling the obligation of law, and also because the visibility, the vocality, I guess, of the conversation had been raised, got together and they looked at what had been done elsewhere. And where I understand they've come to is they said, that California statement, we really like that. It supports a culture of sharing. It promotes open access. It doesn't make anybody do anything. The control of the work still lies with the authors. So I believe that there's a subcommittee this summer working on a version of that for the University of Illinois that they hope to pass. Hasn't happened. I'm not sure when it will come to a vote. But that's where they are, and I don't know that they would have gotten there without the intervention of the legislature. So again, it leaves open the question of what exactly is a mandate, and do we have any mandates at work here? But it is about shaping a culture and voicing a set of expectations, and then the authors of the works will decide to what extent they want to align with those expectations. And because faculty are who they are, I can say this, having been one and now being one again, I'm sure that many will align with the expectations and say, okay, sounds good, I'm down with this. And others will say, no, I'll do it my way. But seeing that play out will be interesting in the months and years to come as the law makes its way throughout the state. Okay, well, I will stop there, and we want to do questions now, right? That's okay, great. Me? Yes.
You mentioned that I think it was Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
The employment contract from the very beginning had the copyright reside with the university as work for hire. Is that atypical?
I'm looking at Gail. John?
That's atypical.
And I would say most of us had no idea. I mean, I was pretty young the first time I signed it, but
Although if you read the Chronicle,
There were only 3 universities in the United States that actually had that historically with regard to copyright. They all had joint ownership with regard to patents, but with regard to copyright, it was very rare.
but
And then the
Well-
statement that they then made it, clarified it by granting it back to the faculty, seems to be in the opposite direction of what most universities are trying to do now.
well, and
that
let's
don't have that.
yeah, and it's interesting if you read the Chronicle. I think today or last night there's a big new article about more assertions in IT policy around teaching materials. So teaching materials and things that contribute to revenue-generating online courses are starting to provoke changes in even those policies like A&M and many, many other institutions that specifically in the system IP policy remove the notion of work for hire for faculty works. In fact, this past year I was on a copyright dissertation task force to also remove any possibility that a doctoral dissertation was a work for hire. So at my institution, interestingly, it's come out very strongly in favor, differently from Michigan, even around student works, even student works that are funded by the state or by whatever, by the faculty's grants. So I think there is a cultural difference. But I do think that the value, the economic value of MOOCs and online courses and things like that are going to spawn a shift in treatment between, a disparity of treatment between scholarly works and those that have commercial value. So it will start looking more like that.
And I cannot count the number of faculty to whom I drew their attention to the fact that they had signed this coming in, as I had signed it, and they just had no idea, and including when I hired our first copyright specialist, and I sat down with, the first day's meeting to say, what are some things we should work on? And I passed him that piece of paper, and I said, I don't know, maybe we should have at least some educational materials about this. And he looked at it and said, what is this? You signed it a couple weeks ago? And you would think he, of all people, would have been attuned, but it was so sort of under the radar and never exercised that people were not attending to it. Others? Yes?
Thank you for the information. I know from the publishing side, as an editor, I guess when the faculty work will be published, they need to sign the agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So is that where they go back to the university and asking for the exemption from the, I presume is that a paper you sign, this is the faculty from MIT, or however, they need to go to the provost to say, I want to publish this paper, and, in Excel, and so they have to get permission to be able to have that copyrighted. Is that how it's happens?
I don't know any place, and maybe my other panelists do, where they actually negotiate that at the point of publication. Do you?
I do. Johns Hopkins, for example, has riders that they send along oftentimes that negate the transfer of copyright but give a redistribute license, essentially, to the publishers. I think one of the bigger questions is how to get authors to understand that they've signed away a right and not sign a piece of paper that they're not entitled to sign. We oftentimes get copyright transferred that are completely invalid based on a previous agreement, going back to what you said with Michigan, where the copyright statement clearly says that all rights are transferred, but the person who signs the piece of paper is unauthorized to do that. And so it's a procedural error in some cases that an author doesn't necessarily follow the right procedure, so they don't go to the provost. They sign the piece of paper regardless. And then you're in a bit of a legal quandary because the university, of course, can assert copyright to the work, but the publisher equally is saying, how am I? There's no way for the publisher to actually know that the person who signed the piece of paper is not authorized to sign it.
Right. Right. And the California policy, maybe one of these guys will talk about this more, has the option to opt out and just say, even though that's the policy here at the University of California, because of my agreement with my publisher, I will not deposit in the repository or allow you to deposit for me. And I think every place has the option of controlling timing. So you can put it in the repository, but say, don't open it for 20 years. And the repository manager might say, 20 years? Really? Let's talk about that. But there can be closed periods of time as well. I think we're, oh, yes.
Hi, I'm from a fundraiser. I actually have it's called the Affordable Care Act, which requires me to do certain things with information produced by my fund vehicles. So I'm going to do that. So I'm curious as to the cultural issues that you're raising. As we're looking into these, as we're trying to figure out the best way to do this. So two of the cases you just raised, I'm just curious as to, in an academic environment, how your view is of how these negotiations go. So the one is, I want a 20-year exemption. Well, that's not happening. For all practical purposes, no publisher will live with that, and the university will, to some extent. The other is the question of people signing documents, which we all know happens all the time, without fully realizing what it is that they're signing and being aware of the internal rules. And I'm not aware of universities suing their faculty or publishers suing faculty very extensively. So I'm just curious as to how you see these kinds of real issues, which I think increasingly are going to have to be resolved in some systematic way, playing out in the academic environment, where there is a great deal of flexibility, I would say, for how one deals with this cultural, in terms of copyright transfer, in terms of following the process and procedures. If a star faculty member wants to publish in a certain place, I think we can assume that's what's going to happen. So I'm just curious as to how, from your point of view, because I'm not an academic, from your point of view, how do you see these discussions playing out in a way that we can try to move ahead beyond kind of an academic discussion and really come to some systematic understanding of how to do this? Because at the end of the day, especially with publicly funded research, there is a substantial question as to just who owns that work in the first place, where the funding came from, all of us in this.
Yeah, sort of for really widespread change, I'm not sure. I think we do see the growth in academic institutions of things like copyright services, copyright offices. So services are in place, often, not always, but often at libraries, to help people understand. And so there's an education push. There are workshops and seminars, and there's also sort of one-to-one reference contact hour things. So that's one way. I wondered too, because I don't think there are universities that are going to go suing their faculty for failure to comply, and certainly not threatening them with dismissal. But it may become more tied into the evaluation process. You do your annual report, maybe you get spot checked to say, so have you deposited or have you negotiated your open access agreement? And that there could be feedback that your case has looked on less favorably because you have not complied in that way. But I don't know if that's happening anywhere yet. Gail, you were going to say?
I had a couple of thoughts. One is that with respect to federal funding, our university is home to a long-standing NSF facility. And because the NSF facility, as it gets renewed, its overlying structure changes, even what country is running this facility. The copyright issues with renewal have cropped up in the last year. And the primary funder, obviously, is NSF, but there's 26 member countries, their NSFs, so to speak, are all throwing money into the pot. And it was a big mess. And it was the NSF contracting officer that was most helpful to our institution in explaining that at the end of the day with federal funding, if it's a contract, which facilities will be, everything falls under FAR, the Federal Acquisition Rules. And it's very clear in those rules around copyright ownership. It's also very clear in NSF contracts that even for research, not contracts, which a facility, but like a PI just doing a 2-year study, which would fall more under a sponsored research, that even where the contracts specifically state that the copyright remains, what is copyrightable remains with the faculty, the PI, NSF, and I would imagine every other federal agency retains a shock right. A shock right, meaning that's like vernacular to say that they have kind of that same right that a university would assert to continue to use it for scholarly and educational purposes and even make it publicly available. And that's what got us out of trouble of not being able to expose our work, because the nation of Japan was the rights holder under the prior NSF facility, and they didn't want things exposed, but because NSF had a shock right, and they basically said, expose it, put it in the repository, it's going public. So I think FAR could be helpful. I think federal contracts and other things like that are pretty good at stating the rules of the road. And I think as funding agencies, anybody else would be nuts not to make those things very clear. And maybe that's where it starts, is those rules need to be made clear. There was a second point I was going to mention that now I completely forgot, but I bet during the discussion we'll have a chance to revisit.
And you're up next, anyway. Should I cede the podium to Gail? Are we on time? Oh, one more question? Yes?
This Illinois law, does it say anything about grants to build against the content?
No, I'm trying to think, I'm trying to remember the list of things to think about, if there's anything in there that talks about, I mean, throughout the law, there's a lot of discussion of maximizing the impact and visibility of the research of Illinois. We're going to promote Illinois scholarship. And in fact, in the one of the concerns expressed in the draft report, it's in the close to the academic freedom section, is that if authors are not allowed to determine their publication venue, the prestige of the research may suffer. And I think there's the implication there that there are some publication venues that are better at building that prestige and building that visibility than others. But again, I don't think, let's skip back up here for a minute. No, not unless it's buried in differences between academic and publishing practices in different fields, the visibility question is addressed. Others? Okay.
Thank you, Maria.
You bet.